Welcome to the Power Up podcast. Now, in today's episode, we're joined by Mark Hastings, Director of i10 Limited. They're a specialist digital data and technological transformation company, mainly operating in the public sector. Digital transformation is often misunderstood as just upgrading technology alone. But at its core, it's really about rethinking how organizations operate, deliver value, adapt using digital tools while putting people and culture at the very heart of that change. And that is often the difficult bit to do. In this discussion, Mark's going to share his insights, but I have to say are very extensive. He's been doing this for a very long time, a seasoned practitioner. In this discussion, Mark will share his insights, which I can say are plentiful. He's a very seasoned practitioner, and he's going to talk to us how leaders can create truly transformative environments by combining technology with empathy, data with emotional intelligence, and innovation with inclusivity, with a special lens on how the complex realities faced by large, legacy-heavy organizations like those in the public sector. That is where his specialty is, I believe. Mark, very warm welcome to you. Would that be an accurate description of what you do? Have we got that about right?
Yeah, sounds good to me. Perfect description. I'm going to start using that, in fact, for myself.
I'll send you the script.
Thank you.
So in this episode, what we're going to discuss is what digital transformation actually means, and we're hoping Mark can shine a light on that. The human element, so why empathy still wins in a digital world, how to spark innovation in big stuck organisations like those in the public sector, and the future of work, so what tomorrow's organisations need from leaders today. And this is a full circle moment for me because Mark and I actually worked together at the very beginning of our careers at Ernst & Young. And I think it's actually around 30 years ago. So that is rather scary, but it is very lovely to have you on the podcast. And actually, we should mention as well that Mark is one of the first people that attended the Power Up programme.
Indeed.
So thank you for supporting that too.
Yes.
Very welcome. Thank you for putting a number on that. That's aged me significantly.
No, we haven't changed a bit. I think we would both agree with that.
No, we're still exactly the same.
I've definitely got a few more grey hairs, but was a few grey hairs between friends. So I think a good place to start for us as well as the audience is what digital transformation actually means.
Yes, digital transformation. I personally think it's a little bit of an unhelpful term because the implication is that it's all about technology, whereas certainly for me, done properly, digital transformation is much more about how an organization fundamentally reshapes how it operates, how it delivers value to its customers, or in public sector terms, outcomes to its users. Yes, there are elements of leveraging digital technologies, but it's also about data. It's also fundamentally done well about people, and in public sector terms, that's about the users of the systems and the services. And it's also about digitizing existing processes, so making them more efficient, more effective, and adding more value to the people receiving those services.
And I guess, historically, technology transformation, it was about introducing new systems or something like that. And those that are responsible for that might have been specialists in that particular technology and maintenance of that technology. But now, I guess those that are involved have to be almost like architects of a whole ecosystem that has to work around technology or something.
One of the challenges in this space, and of course, therefore, one of the opportunities, is that actually the pace of technological change is, if anything, speeding up. It's been evolving pretty quickly over the last few decades, but it's getting quicker and quicker year on year, and that's only going to speed up. So how you keep in step with those technological advancements becomes something of a challenge, whether that's cloud computing or AI or big data and analytics or Internet of Things, mobile technologies. fundamentally they are catalysts for change and transformation, and using them can have a real positive effect on businesses. But one of the challenges, therefore, is keeping up with those changes and staying relevant. And therein lies the opportunity, I think, and the necessity, if you like, to work in different ways to change the culture of organizations, to really become more adaptive, more curious, more innovative, and find ways in which to use those technologies to deliver benefit to users and to customers.
Just bearing in mind, we have a very mixed audience. This podcast is directed at a range of leaders, people who are interested in personal development. Some people have a better understanding of digital transformation than others. Just to put people in the picture a little bit, in real terms, what are we really talking about changing? What's the kind of, give me a sense, or the audience a sense of, what do we move from a world that is serving people in one particular way into another? I mean, I'm sure people have got some level of experience of this, but just trying to get a sense of, you've worked on multiple projects, particularly in the public sector. What are some of the sorts of things that people, if you move from position A to position B, to give me a practical idea of that?
So one of my favourite examples to use is how we renew and apply for our passports. If you think about how it used to be, I think you would cut up and send off your passport. You'd send a big long form that often you got wrong. In fact, I think for a while the post office offered a check and send service.
Yeah.
Because the form was so arduous and so difficult to get right. You'd then send that off, and then you'd cross your fingers and wait for a few weeks for your new passport to arrive. Yeah, and then you'd cut up the old one and send it back. Nowadays, you don't do any of that because that service has been digitally transformed. Now, what you do is you take a picture. There are biometrics that you use, and you can pretty much condense that process down to a few minutes. What government does is it reuses the data they already hold about you to reissue that passport. And that is done much more quickly from a user perspective. So you get your passport quicker. It's less arduous. It's easier to do. And from a public sector perspective, there is less manual effort involved in that process. So the benefit to the user is speed and ease. The benefit to the public sector is that it's cheaper and quicker to conduct that service. So it's sort of a win all around, really.
Yeah,
that's a great.
That's perfect. That is exactly what we're looking for. That's exactly it. I mean, it's reminded me, actually. I remember renewing the tax license on your car.
But when you used to get the little sticker.
I'm old enough to remember those little round stickers, and you would have to go into the post office and probably stand there again with a very, very long form for probably about 45 minutes, and then it would take about 15 minutes for them to do it. And you go home, clutching your and of course, you getting round to doing that was quite a tough thing to do. Yeah. So
I have to say, though, with the passport thing, can you go and work with the Irish government, please? Because I am applying for Irish passports, and we have to register the births first. And I sent the forms off in November. They said it's going to take 9 months. I could have had another baby in that time.
wow.
9 months to register the birth before you can apply for the actual passport. Unbelievable.
But there's a great example of taking something and reusing it, something that digital transformation lends itself to, right? So we've got my wife's family is Spanish. There may now be a toss-up between Irish and the Spanish for the most bureaucratic processes because they're really, really slow and very, very manual too. But that, in digital transformation terms, that pattern that now exists for issuing passports, there's no reason why that cannot be replicated across the world. So suddenly all citizens of all countries and all governments in those countries could benefit from reusing that same approach. That's more challenging, of course, across different countries, but across different departments, where there are similar things that they do, replicating those same things and driving efficiency out that way is a real opportunity that has started to happen in some places, but there's still plenty more to do.
I mean, that's interesting because, you work a lot in the public sector, generally large scale organizations with multi, departments and that sort of thing. What are some of the things that make it hard to transform organizations like that?
Yeah, there's a number of things. So public sector actually is more advanced than many outsiders might think. Public sector has had austerity. It's had cut after cut after cut from government after government after government, and therefore has had to innovate and has had to advance. But there is still plenty more to do. There are still things like lengthy approval processes. It still can be a bureaucratic environment in many places. There's obviously lack of funding. Budgets continue to be slashed and cut. Although there has been a significant advancement in levels of digital expertise, there's still more to do in that space. There's still pockets, plenty of siloed thinking. So departments think in their own way. Departments within those departments, if you like, still are somewhat siloed. So that joined up thinking, there's still plenty more to do there. And of course, there is, as there always is with change and transformation, there is resistance to change. I think sometimes there's a tendency to focus more on the technology than on the people side, and that's where some of the opportunities lie, and that's where specialists like you, wonderful people, come in.
I mean, it's interesting that you say, because the perception is that maybe public sector organizations might be some way behind because, there's the high profile cases that get publicized, things not working within the NHS and all of that sort of thing. But it's quite reassuring to know that actually there's plenty where, things are more advanced there. And
there's definitely, public sector has embraced change at different paces in different areas and different departments. There's some really good frontline technologies within the NHS, for example, but the back office systems need a significant, systems and processes need a massive overhaul, in my opinion. There are some really good examples, like the passport example that I used, where digital transformation has made a real difference. I think the obvious one that really needs tackling is local authorities. So there are significantly more than 300 local authorities across the UK, the vast majority of which do very similar things in completely different ways. There are some real opportunities for using digital transformation and breaking down some barriers and some silos there as well.
When you talk about these different levels of agility, different levels of acceptance, readiness for change, how much of that is down to lack of funding? Where's the cash going to go, cash allocation, etc.? Or how much of it is down to the leadership of those organisations and the culture that exists within them in terms of their willingness and readiness? Are they all ready and willing, but it's cash that gets in the way, or is it the other way around, or a combination?
It's a combination of all of the above. So part of the problem with public sector is every 4 or 5 years you have a new government coming in with different priorities. And that dictates where they put the funding. Couple that with legacy systems, that they've got the old systems that need modernising, and the lengthy bureaucratic approval processes. You can be a year or two into a cycle of government before you get the business case and the funding approved to go off and do a thing which given the state of some of the systems and some of the scale of the organisations, that's a factor as well. These are massive organisations that do take a significant amount of effort and time to transform. You can be partway down a major transformation programme, new government comes in, changes the priorities, and the funding dries up. So there are some real challenges there in terms of shifting priorities. The bureaucracy of the public sector is a factor, but also the leadership aspect as well is significant too. That does become a real factor in these things as well. So there are pockets of willingness, but there are pockets of quite the opposite as well.
I was thinking as well, if you mentioned the speed of technology and it's getting faster and faster, could you be partway down a transformation having chosen this system, and then all of a sudden there's a shiny new improved system over here, and then you've got to change to something new? Surely the speed of technology, is there a level of predictability to what's coming, or are the people involved in making these decisions surprised, as that speed of change and new technologies come online?
So absolutely, new technologies are coming online pretty frequently. Often there's an element of and there's a real art to how you architect and design your technical organization so that it can evolve. I think the recognition that technology is evolving is really important, because then you can design your systems to be able to adapt and to link to other systems and so on and so forth. When you're in a suite of technologies, for example, Microsoft, not that I'm necessarily the biggest advocate of Microsoft, they incorporate these new technologies into their ecosystems, if you like. So Microsoft has brought in Copilot, which is effectively their part of their AI offering. So still you can stay within the same technologies, but benefit from new technologies, if you like. But that still comes back to mindset and evolution, to be able to and willing to adapt to those advancements, whether that's new system advancements or new technology advancements within the same sort of system or technology stack.
Yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we look at that element then, the human element of change, and why empathy still wins in a digital world. How do you bridge that gap between that sort of technological change and the cultural adaptation?
So I completely agree. So while technology might well be the engine of change, that human element is the steering wheel. Mm-hmm. You cannot realistically expect successful transformation without bridging the gap between technological advancements and how people adapt to them. There's a number of aspects to how you do that. Fundamentally, building trust and buy-in is really, really important, particularly in environments that may historically have been resistant or even hostile to change. You've got to create a culture of experimentation, safe spaces for learning, and even failure. Failure is fine. Failure is good. And this is one of the real challenges that public sector has faced and has somewhat adapted to with its adoption of Agile. The sort of fail fast, win or learn, which I'm sure I learned many, many years ago with your good selves, is really, really important. But still, there is a culture, I think probably in general society and certainly in the public sector, of failure being bad. So from a leadership perspective, it's really, really important to create those safe spaces to learn, adapt, fail. But public sector is still beholden to ministerial whims. For example, we have to put this system live on this date because I've said it in Parliament and therefore it has to be. Whereas actually, and I'm sure there's some, the post office example might be really, really relevant here. Whereas actually waiting, doing the testing, designing the system in the right way and putting it live a little later may have been a smarter move. That culture of adaptation and experimentation is really important to set from the outset.
Well, I think that post office is a good example. I mean, that's obviously a very public example with huge collateral damage for human beings and individuals concerned, which we're all very aware of. But I'm sure there are other circumstances where that fear of not getting it right and then being hauled over the coals, so to speak, with public money and ministers involved and their equivalents on the civil side. We have done some work with senior leaders in finance, in government, and they are particularly cautious and very, very mindful of the scrutiny that they're likely to potentially come under. So I can imagine,
Yeah,
adversity or
and
the likelihood of them being averse to change is even stronger. Mm.
very much so. And that the public services that we're talking about are critical. We're talking about critical data.
Mm.
We're talking about public scrutiny because it's public money. We're talking about the stakes being incredibly high. I don't think anyone would advocate for putting a system live that isn't fully tested and working. Those safe spaces come in the run-up to that system going live, and that's where the adaptation needs to come. But often there's certainly at odds with the need to adapt and experiment.
But what do you do? One of the things in talking to you, what we know about you, Mark, is that you try and bring this human element to it. So how do you really go about knowing that it's an area which you have to overcome and deal with, in addition to the more rational, logical reasoning behind putting the change in place? What do you kind of do? What flavour do you bring in the work that you do with your clients to try and pave the way and create that more psychologically safe environment?
For me, it's really about communicate. Part of the benefit we bring is that we understand the public sector, we understand the structures, the governance structures, the pressures, and having that conversation openly and honestly and transparently from the outset, making it really clear what we need from the leadership within our clients in terms of creating that psychological safety, if you like, those safe spaces, and that not everything will go to plan and that's okay, and building into our approaches the transfer of knowledge to the people working alongside us and with us, the civil servants who are working with us, is a crucial aspect of not just implementing the transformation, but also for leaving that client in a better state than we found them. That's through upskilling their people and trying to change the culture. You almost have to do that at times by stealth. It's very hard. The public sector works on contracts and statements of work and outcomes, and trying to build change management statements of work whereby we're going to do some change management is more challenging than actually building that into the hard and fast outcomes from digital transformation. So we kind of we build it into our approach and work it through that way, rather than trying to tag on some change management expertise.
I think it's you mentioned communicate, and I think in that, because it's easy, it's often the data that reveals the need for something to change, but in terms of how that's presented to the frontline user, it's important that that is then embellished in a story in terms of the impact and why the change needs to happen and what that would mean for frontline services and all of that sort of thing, to bring it to life in order for people to understand and engage and support change. So it's interesting.
There are some techniques and approaches that the public sector uses quite extensively now, and this has been a journey for the public sector over a number of years. But there's a lot of what's termed as user-centric design. So that's understanding who the users are of the services, both from the sort of citizen perspective who are receiving those services, but from the policy teams and the back office teams. So understanding who those users are, what their needs are, what their pain points are, what those user journeys are, and designing with those in mind is a key aspect of digital transformation within public sector. But that is where it's really important to stress that it is about the people, it is about the users, and then the leadership element of that becomes really important too. So it's blending those things together. So fundamentally, whether you're talking about AI or whatever it might be, it still comes down to people who are designing those outcomes and people who are implementing those outcomes. So the culture side is massive.
And how do leaders, the huge workforces with many different, generational differences in those that are actually operating them, how do leaders cope with that sort of thing, because you've got very different levels of competence and passion and motivation around technology and acceptance of technology. So how do leaders overcome some of those challenges in terms of the diversity of the workforce?
Yeah, well, I think that's where the other aspect is. There is leadership at lots of different leadership levels within public sector as well, and getting to all of those and turning them into advocates is a particular challenge. So what you often tend to do is find, if you're starting a transformation, you might find the most willing areas, start there, turn that into a positive story, start selling the benefits and communicating the benefits of how we might have achieved that, what the benefits are, and then starting to shout from the rafters and tell people how that's gone. And then suddenly you start to pique interest from other areas and you can start to roll forward on that basis.
Yeah, by stealth. I mean, that's one thing that we spoke about in the culture shift event that we did. We was communicating those positive stories and the gain rather than the gap in terms of where things are.
Focus on the gain, yeah, exactly.
And that does take a lot of effort to you need the structure that you need around that to grab those positive messages, to capture them, to turn them into case studies, to communicate them, to reiterate them. There's a significant amount of effort in there.
Yeah.
Do you use I'm just thinking about, in the same way you can't be what you can't see, you can't, it's difficult to imagine, potentially the very people that you're trying to persuade are the people that actually created the environment they're currently in. So you're selling a new vision of something, in the future. Do you use much sort of storytelling to try and create that picture of what that new world would look like? A bit like your passport story. That's easy to tell the passport story now because the passport story is real. But before the passport story was real, you had to sit there with somebody and say, imagine a world where somebody could, la da 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 da. So I'm just wondering, when you're going in, you're a practitioner, you've got you're steeped in this world. You know the art of the impossible. You've seen it before, you've experienced it before, you're highly referenceable yourself, but you're potentially speaking to an audience who hasn't had that experience, potentially. I'm just wondering about how you go about convincing people of something they've not experienced in the past.
Yeah, so of course you can bring in case studies and examples from other clients, or case studies and examples from that particular client where you may have started elsewhere and transformed other areas. Remind me, by the way, to come back to transformation isn't just for Christmas, it's for life, because that's very important too. That's partly where centering everything in the user stories, the user pain points becomes really important, because then you're understanding how things currently are, where those pain points are, and therefore how they could be improved. And certainly that everyone feels pain points with existing processes. That, this takes me forever. It's really frustrating. It takes all my time to do this, and I'd rather focus my time on really adding this value over here. So you, armed with that information and that insight, you can then use that to design how it needs to be in the future. And that design becomes collaborative. So not only do you work with users to understand their needs and their pain points, you work with those same users to help design how the future state might be, to remove those pain points and to get rid of the challenges that they are facing. So that user-centric design is really, really important.
I think as well, in the post office example, if it taught us anything, it's the importance of that, isn't it? Because the system was treated as infallible, and it was the people, the frontline users, that were treated as liars, essentially. Had that collaboration and that diagnostic up front, and then involving them in the design, the challenges may have never happened. So it's a high profile example of what you've just outlined.
without having really delved into the detail of how and why that all happened, there seems to me to be a fundamental premise of, as you said, well, it can't possibly be the system because we've spent tens of millions of pounds on this system, so it can't be that. It must therefore be people who are acting dishonourably, for want of a better phrase.
Or incompetent.
And indeed.
Yeah.
That very simple refusal to look at the truth, the data, that very simple assumption, if you like, prevented people looking in at the data and really going with curiosity. I mentioned curiosity at the start, to understand what's really going on, has probably perpetuated and evolved into this ridiculous situation where people have been sent to prison for something they just simply didn't do, which is absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, and I can't believe it's still ongoing. It's just ridiculous.
It has to be. It will be, serves one of the best case studies in digital transformation for years and years to come. And we haven't even got to the end of it yet. There are so many lessons to be learned from, as you say, an unwillingness to look beyond what you think is to be true, biases, leadership, political reasons, protectionism. Just a whole plethora of different the culture that was within the organization, the relationship between them and the supplier. There's so many different lessons. And the human element, what is becoming very, very, very clear, is that the further the layers of the onion got peeled back, if assuming the documentary is very accurate, and I'm sure it is, reveals how important that human element is.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you touched on that, so I've been talking about user-centric design. Fundamentally, what's at the heart of that is storytelling that Lisa mentioned, and lots of different ways now to gather data and turn that into insight. But the data alone doesn't resonate with people. What needs to happen to really convert people into advocates of this sort of transformation is to humanize those insights, connect them with effectively the lived experiences of the users and the leaders of those frontline teams. So it's not just about the numbers, it's about the why of the numbers and what that means for people. Because no matter how you look at it and no matter how you cut it, this all boils down to people, whether they are designing those systems or implementing those systems or using those systems. It is very much about the people.
You mentioned in terms of the involvement of people in the design process. How do you encourage a culture of innovation in an environment that is traditionally, sort of large scale, difficult maybe to innovate because of the sheer scale of things? How do you encourage that involvement and that innovative mindset in individuals within those sorts of spaces?
Yeah, so innovation is an interesting word because a lot of people sort of throw it around. We need to be more innovative. And if you really sort of break down what innovative means, it's really about experimentation and evolution. Yeah. Innovation doesn't happen overnight. No. Innovation is just a thing. You don't go into an innovation workshop and go, ta-da, here's the answer. Yeah. Innovation evolves over a period of time because it needs to go through a process. An idea needs to go through a process of testing, of refinement, of testing again and adapting to scale and different perspectives. So that innovation takes time. All the big innovations that people see now, there's often a ta-da moment where something's revealed, and it might be the new iPhone, and it might be AI, and it might be this, and it might be that. Those things took years to develop and test and to iterate. So innovation isn't just a thing you turn on and turn off. It's much more about a cultural change to that mindset of experimentation and adaptation, and it being okay to fail, because actually it's not failure, it's learning. And we've all heard the Edison's light bulb and all of that, which is all absolutely right. Even that, there will have been a big reveal about, oh, look, let there be light type thing. But how long did that take to be able to get to that point? So it is fundamentally about creating a culture where it is okay to experiment and to adapt. And I mentioned earlier about transformation isn't just for Christmas, it's for life. And what I mean by that is too often transformations are looked at as an event. So we need to transform. So we'll have a program whereby it has a start and a budget and an end and an outcome. Then we'll all sit back and go, good, we've transformed now. And then we'll all wake up in 5 years' time and go, oh, crikey, the new government's come in. We've had our budget slashed. We need to transform again. And then you'll start a new cycle of transformation 5 years later. Actually, what's required is that constant experimentation and adaptation and inspection of new technologies. And can we use this, and will this benefit us? And that is all mindset. That is all about becoming more adaptable to change, more willing to evolve. And actually, evolution is an imperative. It's not about evolution to thrive, it's evolution to survive.
Yeah. And I think that two things. I think is a little bit like you said about the technology. Things can get added into existing systems, so it's a continual upgrade. And it's the same in terms of us seeking new and better ways of doing things. That's a continuous process as well. And I think the other point to make is why it's so important to involve people at all levels in that innovative and design process is because sometimes the very best ideas, and often the very best ideas, come from those people at the front line, not from people sitting in an office and trying to.
Well, it's the people that are actually doing the task every day. And that was that big success behind the project we did with Heathrow with engineering.
Yes,
It tapped into the people right at the front line who touch the tools, who fix the assets, who repair the assets, who service the assets. Those are the people that know more about it. And actually, that was the idea behind the chief engineer there, who said, we can sit up here and now hypothesize about what we think needs to happen, but who's the person actually repairing it and looking, well, if we'd repaired this a little bit more often, we would cost less money, or we don't need to be servicing this piece of equipment.
And half of the success of that was actually those people on the front line being given permission to challenge.
Yeah.
Because historically, there's a funny example, isn't there, of the burnt toast. A new guy came in and he was asked to make the toast, and he left it in and burnt it every time because that's what someone had done when he first came in. He didn't actually even think, why don't I just turn the nozzle down? So it's about them challenging themselves, but also having the permission to challenge.
Yeah, there was another example, Mark, where we had this, the sort of the security machines, and they were testing. They were part of these engineers, part of their job was to test the machine. So they would test it, and then they would do the whole test. I think it was either twice or three times, I can't remember. So we test the machine again, and then test it again. And this new guy's come in. He said, "Why are we testing it like three times?" He said, "Oh, no, that's what we do. That's just what we do. That's what we have to do." So anyway, this goes on a bit, and then it revealed at some later point that this guy was so sort of fed up, thinking, "Why are we actually spending all this time doing it?" So he went to the original guy that originally set this protocol up, and he said, "Oh yeah, we're only testing it three times because we didn't trust the machine or something we were using at that time. There was a problem with it. There's no need to do it." But this has now become legacy behaviour. No one was questioning it at all. Everyone was doing exactly, and there were literally numerous examples we were uncovering of processes that have got adapted because of previous conditioning that will actually fit for purpose. They're all done with the right intentions, but you have to give, as Lisa said, you have to give permission to those people to question why. And that was one of his, could describe as the edge behaviour. Ask why. But
absolutely, and that given permission is a really, really important aspect in how you start to change the culture. It's not written into people's job descriptions that they should challenge the norm. They're told to do it in this way, or get on with and deliver these outcomes. But they're not, as you say, given permission to be able to challenge how those outcomes are delivered. And they're often not aware that actually, in fact, they're not told, they're not set the challenge of it being their job to innovate. And that's where some of this experimentation comes in. AI is the big thing at the moment. Give people permission to experiment with AI and how it might help automate some of the job that they do, and therefore free up some time to do some more value add things. That given permission is massive. And that's, if there's one thing that leaders could do, it's give that permission. By giving permission, you then create that culture whereby people are constantly challenging things, and therefore you start to become an adaptive organization that's constantly evolving. That's where it lies, I think, for me.
By stealth, as you mentioned earlier, it's a stealth process.
Yeah, we're
called the people within Heathrow the sort of secret agents of change.
Right.
These champions that we had that were out secretly nudging the new behavior.
Because we always have this view that as soon as you mention the word change, even the word change, least of all the word transformation, I mean, that is going to frighten people off big time. I like your point around evolving, adapting. We're talking about, lessening the word change or transformation. It shows how important language is, because it struck me earlier when you were talking about innovation. If you said to an audience, we need to be more innovative, let's have a workshop on being innovative, about 1% of the audience are excited about that. And that is the person who just loves. It's the quirkiest person in the room, and actually, quite frankly, doesn't actually care whether or not we're innovative or not, just enjoys the idea of being innovative and being out there. For 99% of people, they do not see themselves as being innovative at all, and nor do they see themselves being capable of it. But the idea of someone adapting, evolving, shifting, nudging, gradual change, now I can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I would probably extend that argument and say, if you create that culture of adaptation and improvement, you will never need to change or transform, because it's done by proxy.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've mentioned that some of the qualities of leaders that are needed. So communicating, helping people understand why a change is needed, why this continuous adaptation is needed. You mentioned involving people in the design, giving them permission to try things and innovate and test and be willing to learn along the way. I think another thing is leaders actually role modeling that as well. So being a bit vulnerable, sharing where they maybe need help themselves and where they've tried something and maybe it hasn't worked. I think that's really important. Is there any other qualities that you think leaders need to demonstrate in order to create these agile cultures?
So I think that's absolutely right. I think being vulnerable and modeling the behavior. I think the other one really builds trust is transparency, openness, and honesty. And we talk a lot about working out loud with our clients, which is ignoring who works for whom and just working to openly, transparently, using their communications platforms and working as a single team. And I think there's some elements there that leaders need to model as well, that link to that vulnerability and modeling that behavior and being honest about their expectations in terms of whether things succeed first time, being open about where they haven't achieved what they were looking to achieve and what they have learned along the way, because leaders need to adapt and go on that journey too. None of this is transformation's never complete.
Yeah.
Always an evolutionary process. And that's the same for leaders and for people as well. And it comes back to that constant learning and being comfortable with that iterative sort of process.
Okay, Mark, so we've covered a number of different subjects here. just by way of summary, someone embarking on change and they're faced with the enormity and all the things we've talked about and all the complexities and all the challenges, what would be a summary that would just give people a little bit of guidance, a little bit of confidence that no matter how complex something looks, amazing things can be achieved with the right set of tools and the right set of help?
Yeah, so really for me, I think digital transformation is not about just plugging in new systems. It's about fundamentally reimagining how people work, how people lead, how people connect, and how people deliver outcomes in a world that's constantly evolving. The human element of that is critically important. It's the key things are around building trust, engaging people, communicating effectively, taking people on the journey, working collaboratively, and enabling people to ask why, to challenge, to embrace new ways of working, to fail, learn, adapt, and grow. I think technology is an opportunity, and if approached in the right way, it can really help lead to better outcomes for people working within the public sector, but also for citizens and recipients and users of the services that the public sector delivers.
Excellent. Well, I mean, long may you continue to do that, because I don't particularly want to have to travel to a passport office or queue up somewhere.
Can you go to Ireland next, please?
Yeah, I mean, I did.
Yeah.
So that would be great. I mean, continue doing that and encouraging them to spend their money wisely. You know, we've all experienced some good experiences of, I think the NHS is a great example of an organisation that has amazing people full of amazing great intentions. And they also, really want to help you. The journey, the experience you have in getting those services, appointments, who to go to, transfer of records can be a nightmare.
Joining up the
conversations. And I know with some of the, technology services companies we work with, when they're doing their pitches, they really try and put the, day in the life of a patient coming to a hospital and show how you, with the right digital tools, you can make that, it's already stressful, you can make that journey a lot more palatable for them.
Absolutely. I mean, where we are, we sort of sit near the borders of 2 or 3 or 4 counties. And if you go to one hospital for a blood test, they won't share that information with another hospital because they're a different trust.
Right.
And it's like, it's my data. It's not your data. It's my data.
No, that's the thing.
Please send it to them so that you can help me
get a
better outcome, which might or might not be life and death. And it's just how they still send letters out is beyond me.
Still work to do, and that's the exciting thing, and it will get better. And
it sounds like you got a pitch to do there.
Yeah. I think obviously we're very much on the leadership and people change element. I know you do an element of that yourself, Mark. That's what keeps us busy and always will do. All the time there are people, there'll be resistance. We are evolving, we are getting better, we are getting more adaptive. Workforces are becoming more agile and adaptive, but the speed and the requirement of those changes is accelerating, as you mentioned earlier. AI in particular has had a whole different level of complexity to things, excitement on one hand, nervousness on the other. So we're here in another round of massive innovation, big breakthroughs. So yes, I think that both of us will always have busy lives.
And long may that continue, because we're all passionate about what we do and making a difference. And some of the narrative around some of these things isn't helpful either. So AI is coming for your jobs and all of that stuff. Actually, AI is here to help automate the really boring, mundane parts of people's jobs and help people focus on the more interesting value-add stuff.
Absolutely.
So think embrace, not...
If people are embarking on something and want to get in touch with you, how should they do that?
That's a very good question. They can look at our website at www.i-10.co.uk. We are also on LinkedIn and X it is now, isn't it? I still think it's...
I can put the links in the show notes and stuff.
Or drop me a line, mark.hastings@i-10.co.uk.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, Mark. Enjoyed speaking with you about this.
Incredibly insightful conversation. Thank you.
All right. Super.
It's a
Thank you very much.
pleasure to spend time with you both.